All right, I have a quorum of the Governmental Affairs Committee, so we will begin the Governmental Affairs component of this meeting. So can I get a roll call of Governmental Affairs?
The Councilmember Morel,
Here,
Councilmember Jeruso, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember King, Councilmember Green. We have a quorum of the Governmental Affairs.
thank you. With that, I will move for the approval of the minutes of the September 28th Governmental Affairs Committee meeting. Second, Councilman Druso has moved. I've seconded. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. The minutes are approved. We will go to the appointments component of the agenda. First up, we have Molly Pounds for the Alcohol Beverage Control Board. Let's go right to that podium right there. We'll start. I'll ask you the same question I ask everyone else. Why do you want to serve on the Alcohol Beverage Control Board?
Well, good morning. So I believe that serving on this board will be a good intersect between my legal knowledge and community knowledge, and able to give it a full in-depth review of the disciplines and appeals that come before the board.
All right, Councilman Moreno.
Thank you. I'm not on this committee, but I just wanted to say that that Molly, I think, would be a great person to serve on this particular commission, and it'd be great to get some new young blood in there as well.
All right, I will move for the approval of Ms. Pounds. By the way, she has a completed form that the committee is in receipt of. So I've moved. Councilman Harris seconded. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. We will move you favorably to the full council meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
Next up, we have Wilmer Jacobs. Wilmer Jacobs.
They submit a form, Ms. Bolden. So he submitted a form.
What was that form submitted timely? Because right now I know I'm in receipt of one timely submitted form. Let me get my staff here for a second.
So he's out of town, Mr. Jacobs.
I've confirmed from my staff that form was not submitted timely, so that person will be pushed to the next governmental affairs meeting.
Gotcha.
All right, next up, Emily Wolf.
She also submitted, this one, I think, resubmitted the form.
Yes. And we are in receipt of her form, which is completed.
All right, I'll move for approval.
Well, we asked my question first, man.
Oh, I thought Emily was.
We gotta ask our question.
I
Why would you like to serve on the Audubon Commission? Everybody gets the same question, Mr. Druso. Why are you trying to skip?
glad that you are staying on brand.
I'm staying on brand. All right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'd be happy to sit on the Audubon Commission. I've worked closely with Audubon over the years in my capacity here at the city, along with all the other park partners. And I'm now in my capacity at Children's Hospital, and would be happy to just continue to foster a close relationship between those two organizations.
All right. I'm in receipt of a completed form. Councilman Druso moves that we approve Ms. Wolf, seconded by Councilman Harris. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. You'll be forwarded to the full council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am in receipt of a timely form for Mr. Ludovico Fioli.
Yep.
And as such, he has a completed form. It is signed and authorized by his council member. I will move to approve Mr. Fioli. Seconded by Councilman Harris. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. He'll be forwarded to the full council for approval. Next up, we have Miss Laverne Toombs. Oh, there she is. Laverne, you saw the question. You know what's coming. Why do you want to serve on the View Curray Commission?
Well, thank you, council members and committee members as well. This is a reappointment for me. I have served on the VEER Commission for a year. And the reason that I enjoy serving on that board is because I love the city of New Orleans and the French Quarter and its architectural structure, and want to make sure that it stays intact because it's very important to our culture and our history in the city of New Orleans.
Okay, we are in receipt of a completed form. Mr. Jeruso has moved to approve. I've seconded. please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. You forward to the full council for approval. Thank you, Laverne.
Thank you.
Pleasure seeing you. Next up, we have Mr. Vincent Weaver. All right, Mr. Weaver, we are in receipt of your completed form. Why would you like to serve on the UCRAG?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for having me up here today. Really, it comes down to experience. I served as facilities directors on 3 different historic Black college universities, Alabama A&M University, Fort Valley State, and Howard University. 2014, I started BBG Construction, where we've been in business for the past 9 years. And I really have a connection and tie to New Orleans. Families here, born and raised, so appreciate it.
Okay, well, we said we're in receive a completed form. I will move to approve Mr. Weaver, seconded by Councilman Harris. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. You will be forward to the full council for consideration. Thank you for being here today. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Next up, we will go to the item 5 on the agenda, which is the saltwater intrusion update. We have representatives from the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans to present. I'll begin by thanking y'all for being here today. We really appreciate y'all taking the time. I know there's a lot going on with Sewage and Water Board right now. And I think this is an excellent opportunity for the public to be updated on what steps are being taken place to address the saltwater intrusion crisis. So whenever you guys are ready.
Absolutely. Thank you, Council President Morrell, for inviting the Sewage and Water Board team back to give a brief and updated briefing. Very positive news. I'd like to introduce the team. To my right is the Deputy General Superintendent, Steve Nelson. And to my left, our wonderful communication director who has worked very hard the last 2 weeks, keeping her busy. So it's going to be a team approach. I'll start off with the briefing. Steve's going to come and get into the technical aspects of where we are with the saltwater intrusion, and then followed up by Grace. We'll have a quick briefing on the communication aspect. So again, what is it? As we all know, the saltwater, the drought. We've been in a drought pretty much 1.5 years or 2 that pretty much participated in the low flows in the Mississippi River. So again, it's almost like the 2nd year in a row. And based upon that, the salt water is slowly making its way, it has stalled making its way up the Mississippi River. Right around mid-June into July, the Corps of Engineers constructed a sill, an underwater sill right around mile marker 63.7. And part of that, was really it pretty much serves as a storage area for the saltwater. As you're aware, the saltwater density is heavier than, so that saltwater and a wedge will progress upstream underneath the freshwater, and that's what's been happening since this summer. This is the 2nd year in a row. Last year, the same occurrence did occur. The sill has been constructed, the original sill, right around sometime in July, and the Corps is in the process of constructing an upper sill. So it's an upper sill with a notch about 600 or 650 feet, but it can always, so it can continue to have shipping commerce navigation in the river. Some of the positive benefits that we've seen with the sill itself is slowing down the salt wedge itself in conjunction with the increased flows in the Mississippi River. So the last time we were here, we asked everyone to pray for rain in the upper Mississippi River Valley, and that little rain does help because as of yesterday, our flows based upon the Corps' website, and I will inform the public that the Corps has a very good website with a lot of information relative to the saltwater intrusion. The flows as of yesterday were right at 167,000 CFS. So that's an improvement. So again, what you see on the screen is the saltwater wedge. Based upon that, these dates, the dates from last week were a result of the modeling and what the Corps has indicated to us that they're using their experts in ERDIC. ERDIC is their Engineering Research and Development Center up in Vicksburg, Mississippi, the old Vicksburg Waterways Experimental Station. They're using a supercomputer to put in the data from the National Weather Service for predictive modeling on the river. And as of last week, the impacts to Orleans facilities tentatively was 23 of November for Algiers And there were no impacts relative to the schedule from last week. So it's interesting to see what may come out this week based upon revised schedule that will come up. So going into the next slide, the good news there is that the toe of the wedge last week and since September 24th was at river mile 69.4, if not mistaken. Based upon this new data, as you can see, the toe of the wedge is at river mile 63.9. So pretty much it has decreased or retreated downstream right at 5.5 miles. So that is very good news for the entire region. And part of that is the increase in flows, I believe, from the Mississippi River. Again, where is it now? We just said it's the wedge is at 63.9. And so it does give us some breathing room. The precipitation that's happening in upper Mississippi River Valley, as well as there's some rain in Arkansas River Valley, Ohio, and Missouri. That little bit, although it's not the 8 to 10 inches they needed to get to 300,000 CFS, but it's enough rain to increase those flows over 150,000 CFS to sustain that such that it can keep the toe of the wedge at bay. And based on the information we've heard from the Corps in the El Nino year where we are, is that October is relative a dry month, but going into November, they are predicting, quote unquote, predicting National Weather Service, an increased amount of rain in November, December time frame, which should increase the river flows and to push the salt wedge back. So I'll turn it over to Steve, who'll take it over from to discuss a little bit on the technical aspects of where we are.
Excellent. Thank you all again for having us here this morning. Very pleased to report that the sill is doing its job. As Ron mentioned, the toe of the wedge as of this morning is actually that if something changes, if the predictions that the Corps has do show that the salt wedge moves up the river, we're ready and measures would be in place. I do want to emphasize water remains safe for consumption in all normal uses. We're testing chloride levels at both of our intakes on a daily basis. We're reporting that on our dashboard at swbno.org. So if folks have a question about what does the salt water look like in the river right now, they can go check that out at any time. Ron also mentioned the Army Corps' website, which has got really good information on the location of the toe of the wedge, flows on the river, other things that might be interesting to folks if you have questions. Well, as we talked about last time, and as folks have probably seen, we of course have two different water treatment systems, the East and West Bank. Our West Bank treats just around 15 million gallons a day, and our East Bank treats on average 150 million gallons a day. So those naturally will require those two talked about previously. On the next slide for the West Bank, the Army Corps has indicated to us, as I've mentioned before, that they can barge in enough water to provide up to the full day's usage. So a full 14 million gallons a day for us to be able to blend. So basically, if we do see elevated chloride levels, the Corps can provide enough water for us to be able to use nothing but water barged in from upstream. So the way that we're going to make that happen, and we'll show you a graphic here in a moment, is to place what's called a cofferdam. It's an enclosure around the intake. We'll have what's called a spud barge, which is a barge that will sit in the river, that will have pumps that can move the water from the Army Corps' barges into the cofferdam, mix it if we need to, and then run that into our intake. So very little in the way of modification to our existing infrastructure, but will allow us an easy and straightforward method of mixing that water if we need to. That is currently out for public bid. We expect bids to be submitted on next Monday is when we expect to have bids. And we'll talk about the reasons for having a public bid process for both of these projects in a moment. Relative to the East Bank, as you saw in a couple of slides ago, it's about 150 million gallons a day. So there aren't enough barges around to be able to barge that amount of water in. There aren't that many reverse osmosis units on planet Earth to be able to provide that much water in the short amount of time. So the best option for us at this point is to be able to put a pipe in place that will run about 10 to 12 miles upstream to a location at or around Kenner, known as the Kenner Hump. There's a hydrologic feature in the bottom of the river that the Army Corps tells us will stop the saltwater wedge. At this point, Fortunately, based on the previous forecasts, we don't anticipate elevated chloride levels at our Carrollton location, but we have a set of plans ready. We're waiting to see the Corps' prediction this Thursday, just to be certain. But we do have plans in place. We are working on the permits with the Corps. That has not stopped. That will not change. We're also working on rights of entry to ensure that if we do need to execute this, that private property owners are consulted and we have those agreements in place. So we're making certain that all the pieces are there and ready to move. But we do want to be certain that, as we'll talk about later, we're doing this in a fashion that's fiscally responsible, as well as first and foremost, taking care of the health and safety of our customers. Next slide. So this is a little bit of a graphic that depicts what a cofferdam and mixing apparatus would look like. Obviously, this isn't to scale. It's for illustrative purposes. Our intakes are not in the same location, but what you see on the left is what our Carrollton intake would look like. Essentially, you would have that pumped water piped into a cofferdam, which is an enclosure around the intake. We would have gates or openings within that cofferdam that would allow the water to mix. And then our intakes would be able to take that water in and run it to our treatment plant just like it normally would. The difference between the East and the West Bank is, again, of course, the barging. We would have barges supplied by the Army Corps that would come down the river from where they have fresher water upstream. We would have pumps on that spud barge that would be able to pump that water from the barge into the cofferdam, where that would mix and be able to be taken in to our plant. Next slide, fiscal responsibility. We do want to be certain that through all of this, of course, first and foremost, we're protecting the health and regional, local, and state partners. Everyone has bent over backwards to make this happen. And it has really been an encouragement to me as a relatively new member of the Sewer and Water Board to be able to work as a regional group together to come up with these solutions. Along with that, though, we do want to ensure that our solutions are sustainable. So even if we don't augment our existing water treatment system, there are solutions that we are currently in the process of planning. We received proposals for our comprehensive water system plan 2 weeks ago. So the timing is very good. And I think it's really important for us to remember that if it's $250 million to put in a temporary pipeline, what level of resources could we put in place to be able to augment our existing systems to affect change and mitigate this risk in the long term? I think we need to be sure that we're taking a hard look at that and working with FEMA and others to ensure that we're mitigating future risk. Next slide, I did want to address corrosion control. This is one of those elements that we're taking very seriously, and we continue to move proactively. That has not shifted or changed. We are testing chloride levels at both of our intakes daily, reporting that on our website, as I've mentioned. We're also reporting a full battery of water chemistry results back to LDH and EPA for their experts analysis. And we're working on a corrosion sampling plan. So we've identified properties within Orleans Parish that have lead service lines. We'll be approaching those customers and asking if they would be willing to provide us with samples so that we can get baseline data before any elevated chlorides. And if we see elevated salt levels at our intakes, we'll be testing on regular intervals to make sure that there aren't any effects and reporting that information back to our customers as well. This is all being coordinated through the Joint Information Center, or the JIC. So we're not out here doing our own thing separately. The communications and the coordination, I want to stress, we've been working hand in glove with LDH at the state, with Jefferson Parish, with St. Bernard and Plaquemines, and we continue to work together and will continue to do so until this threat has passed. I want to talk a little bit about some conservation tips. Water conservation isn't necessary right now, but it is always a good idea. I've taken on some of these things myself. So all of this is available for the public to review on our dashboard at swbno.org. But to just go through these tips and pointers, check our toilets, showers, and sinks for leak. I replaced the flapper on one of my toilet valves last week. You can use up to 15,000 gallons in a month from a leaking toilet. Turn off faucets when you can. Things to consider would be to sweep our porches and driveways rather than spraying them off. Go without a car wash. My wife can, I haven't voluntarily done this, but my wife can attest that I've taken this one to heart. Let our grass go dormant. We're going into a season where it's cooler. We'll see more rain. So, and again, these are not things that you have to do, that we need to do right now. These are suggestions. And if we get to the place where we need to dilute water, these are things that we can all take on ourselves. And then be thoughtful about how and when we water our plants. To go through some public outreach and community communication.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Council. As Steve's saying, in addition to being part of our Regional Joint Information Center, our Communications Department is making a concerted effort to share regular information with our audiences through various channels. You'll see here a screenshot of our dashboard that Steve has been referencing. On it, you'll find our daily chloride levels, frequently asked questions, and the new projections from the Corps of Engineers as we get them. Social media and media relations has been key to this effort. Those chloride levels are shared each day on our social media channels. We've probably fielded hundreds of media requests since the beginning of this event. And all those other agencies that Steve mentioned have just been invaluable, not only to help us flesh out our frequently asked questions, but just to help us be those subject matter experts that we need. I'd like to thank also Anna Wynn with NOSEP and NOLA Ready for just bringing all those regional partners together every day on that JIT call. It's been really invaluable for us. How can our customers prepare? As Steve and Ron always say, remain calm. The saltwater has not reached anywhere near New Orleans yet. We'll follow the conservation practices when needed. As always, sign up for NOLA Ready for the emergency alert. In addition to that core website that you guys mentioned and our dashboard, the Louisiana Department of Emergency has an incredible website with a wealth of information as well. That's all from us for the presentation. We're here to take questions.
Yep. First up, Councilman Druso.
Thank you. Good morning. I wanted to start with the fiscal responsibility piece because that's the one that worries me the most. I guess first, are we still under federal and state and city emergency declarations, notwithstanding the fact that it looks like we're going to avoid the worst of this on the East Bank?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So with that in place, do we have any sense? We've heard the numbers somewhere between 100 to 260 million to do the grand plan. How much of that would be reimbursable?
Is offered to pick up 12.5%. So it could be as high as 12.5% for the local utility, but that is still under discussion.
Okay. So we don't have, I mean, again, I'm not trying to pin you down, but I'm trying to set expectations for all of us, and we're starting budget next year. So the urgency and importance of this is first and foremost, I think, on all of our minds. So that would be roughly somewhere between 30 to 35 million on behalf of the agency needed in order to begin this. Would that be right?
That's correct.
And then I think this goes without saying, but I want to set up the question. We had this in 1936 and then not again until 1988. I can understand having a lack of wariness when events are 52 years apart, but now we've had 2012, 2022, 2023. Are we starting to get to that point of we need a long-term contingency plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we alluded to it there in that fiscal responsibility slide. A permanent solution is absolutely necessary. We don't anticipate that this will happen less frequently. with climate change being what it is and the situation that we've seen, history is a teacher for us. But we also need to be ready to look forward to the future. And we do, like I mentioned, we have that water quality master plan. We have proposals in hand. We need to get moving on that quickly and be able to implement some of the findings of that sooner than later.
And one other comment I'd like to make, piggyback on Steve. This is not just a single parish effort. This is a regional effort. Ever since this, I wouldn't say a couple of weeks ago when we were informed of potential of impacts of Orleans Parish as well as Jefferson Parish, but this has really become a true regional effort. Working with our regional partners, local, state, and federal government to find a potential regional solution for this long-term issue. So just wanted to mention that yes, we're looking at water board on our end, but also working with the other parishes to see if we can come up with a regional solution for this entire for this incident.
Well, all right, let's telescope out for a second then on that one. So the Times-Picayune recently reported that when the dredging occurred in the river, everyone foresaw that saltwater intrusion would be an issue. Does that mean, in addition to the splits that we're talking about here, that we can expect extra relief from our federal partners, since this was done with eyes wide open to promote national commerce, and the metropolitan region is at the epicenter of the success for the rest of the country, but then the downside of the environmental fallout?
I can't answer that, Councilman Giarrusso, but we can say, working with our regional partners, which includes the federal government, whatever assistance, technical or financial, with fiscal responsibility that comes with it, we'll definitely accept it. But that's just a hard question to answer at this point.
I get it. I guess let me just say it maybe a little bit differently from my perspective.
Okay.
I am all about everybody sharing, and the fact that SALT principle is in play, that we are the sum of our parts, and that everybody has to have sacrifice from time to time. But in this instance, New Orleans, Jefferson Parish, St. Bernard, Plaquemines are the sacrificial lambs. And I think it is completely warranted to expect our federal partners to help contribute, given what our sacrifice means for the rest of the nation. Also here, it says timeline has allowed time for cost analysis and project review. Does that mean we can expect any of the costs to shift downward, because we're still worried about urgency, but it's not as though everything needs to be completed by the end of October? The timeline has shifted. So should we expect costs to go down as a result?
Yes.
Do we have an order of magnitude yet?
No.
Not as yet.
No.
All right. When will we expect to have that order of magnitude?
As Steve said earlier, the largest cost is really relative to the East Bank water treatment plant.
Right.
That is the bulk of the cost. So when we said a week and a half ago, $150 to $200 million, we can say that number has been exceeded. And I don't have a problem saying that. So right now we're in an order of $200 to $300 million. That's the magnitude we're dealing with to deal with this, which a large portion of that would come from the pipeline. So it is a huge undertaking, huge financial undertaking. And again, the news what we have here would shift those costs down tremendously, especially for the East Bank wastewater treatment plant. We are focusing more on the West Bank. But again, when the new projected timeline comes out Thursday, we'll definitely know. But based upon the data that we've seen today, with the total wedge shifting to the south by 5.5 miles, it should be less of an impact on the East Bank water treatment plant, which is pretty much the lion's share of that large estimate.
Right. I guess my point, though, is if you have to rush to do something, you usually have to pay a premium for it.
That's correct.
And so the premium should be reduced now, and there ought to be a delta as a result. And so I think we're all in the management expectation business right now. And you know, I think what the public wants to see, what we want to see, is, given the fact the news has changed, now showing that we're proactively preparing for what outcomes can be, and consistently talking about how much it's going to cost, where the burdens fall, what timelines to look at have been great. And to that end, I would bootstrap and say I think the decision to share the saltwater information online is great. I mean, I've already had people reach out and say, thank you to Sewage and Water Board for doing that. So I think that's what the public is interested in right now, is getting the information and understanding where things stand and knowing that something that's gonna. Okay, when we talk about the permitting process, any delays or anything we need to know about there? I mean, we expect all permits to be granted in due course.
Yeah, the Army Corps has been fantastic. They have a dedicated team. Any questions we have, they're answering immediately. So no, we've seen no delays there.
Okay, and then I mean, I guess just circling back to fiscal responsibility. I'm sorry to keep on harping on this, but I do think it'd be good as soon as reasonably possible to kind of understand what the costs look like as we head into budget season, because I don't want to speak for everybody here on the council, but I think we can all pretty much agree this is an urgent, important infrastructure need that requires immediate attention. And if we're going to draw resources to this in order to protect our drinking water long term, then we need to be immediately positioned to do so, and B, kind of manage, again, expectations on other sides about what is happening and what's not happening. And so I think, again, the earlier we can get that new number and then understand what portions are, that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Thomas.
First of all, the first thing I want to do is thank Mr. Spooner and Mr. Nelson. You guys have been more than stellar in your interviews. Steve, the panel discussion we were on this past weekend about water, and I think you were able to break it down where everybody got a chance to understand it. Mr. Spooner, you've been exemplary in your comments in your interviews. So we really owe gratitude, the level of clarity, I think, and information that you guys have given. It's been a blessing to be able to watch you guys, especially with some of the fears and heightened fears that people have had. I wasn't going to deal with this, but Councilmember Giroux asked a question that I think related to the history of it. Councilmember Sally Ann Glassman, Press Capital's wife, and the International Water Collaborative have had conferences and meetings here and forums here since post-Katrina. The Corps water experts from around the world have been part of those conferences. I was fortunate enough to host one maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So the question about the Mississippi sea level of saltwater rising, the direction of the river, Guy McGinnis, the president of St. Bernard Parish, has been one of the leading voices when you talk about the tributary system and the sediment and how the river flows and what happens in terms of repairing land. So with this crisis, and the press, I guess it never covered all of those conferences and all of those experts and all those conversations. So it's not a new thing for folk to question, you know, are we in danger? Does the river flow the right way? What level of protection do we have from the rising tide and what's happening with the polar ice caps? But that's not a new discussion, just like it's not a new from 1920 to 1988 with the dreaded saltwater wedge creeping up the river and what happened the last couple of years. So the question is, at what point, especially given what our strategic oil reserves are, especially given the importance of the 34th state tributary system, what does a nation do? Can we protect it from climate change and those things? So that Times Picayune article about the dreaded wedge and what the Corps and the country didn't do is a new. The experts from around the world have met here over the last couple of decades to try to get a hold on that discussion. And we have some experts here in town who have been leading voices on that. My question is, it's interesting to me that a question that was asked on the Good Morning Show on WBOK, and it's one of the leading voices in this community, especially because the people pretty much get to ask the questions, has now been dealt with publicly. When you deal with waste processes that have to do with how do you filtrate and how do you purify that water. So a question was asked this morning, what happens to that wastewater once it goes through the primary and secondary process? And then what folks may not know is that that water is dumped into our natural water systems. But what we think it is at a level where it's been purified enough that nature can continue to filtrate it and move it down the rocks and down the water and down the rivers and into the sea. But the question was, because of the salinity of the salt water and the density, does it trap that filtrated water? And does it have any impact on the biological process of none of the people have asked that question at all. Since they're here, and since people the wastewater and filtrated.
Wastewater treatment plants.
The next question was, because of the dreaded saltwater wedge, I think people were starting to figure out if they could find saltwater wedge Halloween costumes. We've been so frightened by the wedge. Do we anticipate any additional costs or burdens passed on to ratepayers or people in this community? Because now all of a sudden, because it's not new, the media is paying attention to it, because it will possibly be a recurring issue. And because what we know now from water experts, we haven't holistically dealt with this, given the direction of the water, climate change, and what's happening with our natural topography. What more is it going to cost the people who live in this community, potentially?
The current plan now will not cost our ratepayers any increase due to the federal participation. There's no intent on our end to raise rates associated with this event. I just want to put that out. So
I thought it was important to put that out.
The second part is the long-term solution will probably require an increase in infrastructure funding. So again, any long-term solution to address the infrastructure funding, specifically this saltwater activity intrusion, will probably require an increase in the funding to address those issues long-term.
And then lastly, Reverend Calhoun asked about erosion and corrosion. And even though we haven't exceeded that limit, what is it can we expect from our pipes in our homes, some of our infrastructure, and our appliances? Should there be any impact, or would it be negligible or no impact at all?
Yeah, at this point, there's no elevated chloride levels, so folks shouldn't be concerned about that at this moment. The question about pipes, corrosion, and lead services, that's where the testing piece is really, really important. And we will be reaching out to folks this week to get permission to be able to take tests. And we would encourage our customers to help us out with providing test results in their water. As far as appliances goes, it's hard to say. It would depend on the appliance, but I know not St. Bernard, but Plaquemines, those folks in Lower Plaquemines have been dealing with this for many, many months. So it wouldn't be an immediate issue. It would be something that would take time, but it's something that we're taking very seriously, and we want to get that testing going right now, regardless of what.
And then I'm gonna do Eugene Green. The last thing I'm gonna say is I know Council President McGinnis, in my meeting with him, said he appreciated the level of coordination and cooperation. And he would hope that that will be how we handle a lot of regional business moving forward. But you guys have been real exemplary. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Moreno, and then Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. First, Mr. Spooner, to you and your team, great job.
Thank you.
Really great job. Also to Colin Arnold as well, and his team. Great job and really getting information out to the public as well. I'm going to go kind of through your presentation and ask questions on different slides. First is on the next steps, the West Bank, on the 14 gallons of fresh water daily to add to the intakes coming in from the barges. Does this mean that the water will still be safe to drink once you bring in this water?
Absolutely. That makeup water from the barges will be Mississippi River water. It's the exact same stuff that we're using right now. It will just be removed farther upstream of the wedge. So it would be low chloride water, but it's absolutely safe.
So once we have this mitigation measure in place, the folks in Algiers should not have to worry about the impacts of the wedge. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, the West Bank has been a primary focus for us. I know it hasn't gotten quite as much attention because the dollars are lower, but we've been working very, very hard with the West Bank mitigation as a priority.
Great, thank you. On the next steps for the East Bank, when we talk about the pipeline to Kenner, the 12-mile pipeline, so has the contractor been hired for this?
Not as yet, no. So we had a price in place from a contractor, but with the news about the wedge being pushed out, they were unable to secure the bid bond. So what we have an opportunity to do now is we've been able to refine those documents and they are ready to go to rebid if necessary. If the Corps, because the Corps forecast right now shows it pushing out past any foreseeable future. But we've been assured that the work can be completed within 30 days. So if not today again for competitive proposals to make sure that we get the best price possible.
Would it be beneficial to go ahead and put the bid out so that we can acquire a contractor? And then should the, projection shift, we already have the person ready to go and we don't have to delay a few days to try to get a new bid out.
One thing, as Steve said earlier in his presentation, we are waiting to see the next report that comes out from the Corps this Thursday. That report that comes out Thursday will make a determination from then, the path forward for the East Bank, due to the large size. On the side of caution, let's see what this report comes out Thursday, and then we'll determine the path forward.
Got it. And have almost like an impact report should there be no long-term plan. What would be the health, the economic impact, the infrastructure cost, the overall cost to people's personal property, appliances, et cetera? Like, what would be the overall cost should there be no long-term mitigation measure? And we just got absolutely impacted by the wedge. Is there work being done to try to analyze the potential? Could potentially be more billions of dollars of cost to our area.
I would say Steve chime in after.
I saw Steve, would you shake?
FEMA has generated tables that show the per day, per capita impact of a loss of utility service. And they estimate that for every day lost for every customer, it's about $116 a day. So at a population of 330,000, that's $338 million a day.
Wow.
If folks were to lose water service. And if it were to last 90 days, as this was initially anticipated, we're well over $3 billion in economic impact. So it's significant.
Yeah.
Water is essential to life.
And the reason why that is so important, Steve, is that, you know, we keep hearing every once in a while, you know, some pushback of like, oh, it's a $200 million pipe or, you know, or potentially more, even a long-term solution could, what if it's $500 million? But with what you just said,
Yeah.
it is well worth it, particularly if it's going to be a permanent solution. And I think the other thing too, that has been mentioned, but I think it needs to be addressed as to why it's likely not a viable solution, is putting in place a long
You know, from a long-term perspective, the only desalination, that's the only way you can remove salt from the water. And the nation is in Carlsbad, California, is Bud Lewis. That's a 50 MGD plant. That's a mixture. Again, a billion for 50 MGD. On average, producing 140 to 150 million MGD a day. Now, slight difference is that the Carlsbad plant treats seawater via reverse osmosis. So since the river, we don't expect to get 35,000 parts per million, but even at 3,000 to 5,000 parts per million, your cost may come down somewhat, but the desalinization really is the only way to get rid of, to extract that salt out, or you can try and do pipelines upstream, but salt water can track you upstream. So, you know, there are desalination plants across the nation. California has a few, Florida has a large, quite a bit.
San Diego has a huge one.
That's the Carlsbad that sends supplements the freshwater water surface from San Diego. And then Tampa Bay just got through recently, a couple of years ago, with a desalination plant to supplement their water supply also.
Yeah. But yeah, I think whatever we can do to work toward, you know, having this permanent type of further upstream pipeline, you know, just from what you all have been saying and additional research, it seems like that likely would be the best scenario. Now it's just making sure that the federal government understands what the cost is of not building a permanent solution.
And I just want to say the pipeline is temporary, not a potential long-term solution, because as the salt water progresses upstream, the phase approach, you have to extend you're extending that pipeline ahead of the salt water. So again, you're pretty much down to desalination in order to effectively have a long-term solution.
Yeah, well, that's kind of you know, interesting, because if desalination and having that type of facility here, you think would be the long-term solution, would that be something that, you know, would be a regional thing or just for the Sewage and Water Board?
No, I would say first from a regional perspective, because again, the Mississippi River doesn't discriminate. And if I said at community meeting, I think I said at Councilman Harris community meeting, it doesn't discriminate because you're in Orleans Parish, Jefferson, St. Bernard, or Plaquemines. Or potentially if the river gets low enough, it can reach St. Charles Parish. So again, it's a potential for a regional solution that you can supply that need at a regional level. But again, that's regional cooperation. Going to Councilman Gerusso's comment, a large participation on the federal level from a fiscal standpoint of view, because there's no parish in this region that can afford to pay for construction of a new desalination plant on its own.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, and Ron, and Anna, thank you for attending the District B Town Hall. I really appreciated it. And we had a lot of good questions and discussions, so thank you for that. I do want to sort of hit the elephant in the room, which is, you know, we're getting questions about Jefferson Parish's progress on their pipeline. Why haven't we progressed? Can you've addressed it, but can you just address it head on?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Jefferson Parish, we have been working very closely with them hand in hand. And what they're moving forward with is on their west bank, which is about 15+ miles. So it's a much further distance for them to have to lay that pipeline down. And that's the decision that they've made to
restaurants.
But as Steve indicated in his presentation, the West Bank, the intent with dilution, if we go with dilution, then we're operating as normal. The point is to dilute that water at the intake. And once we get to the distribution system, it's our daily normal operating parameters, which we'll do.
All right, and then finally, we talked about water conservation. Steve, I appreciate that. Grace, I appreciate that as well, since that's one of the questions that I asked early on. But what are you all doing to conserve water? Meaning, we know that there are a lot of water leaks throughout the city. Are you ramping up operations to address those water leaks as this is creeping closer? My point being, no work has stopped on your end because of this saltwater wedge.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So I will say, yes,
To be
we have
clear.
made water leaks a focus, especially on the west bank, because it is so important that we get that production number down as low as possible. So our zone 6 and zone 2 crews have really done a fantastic job of really focusing on water leaks and have been able to reduce that water production number pretty substantially.
And I saw that y'all did some maintenance on hydrants as well, and making sure that I think that's hugely important as community members see water leaks from there. And we're asking them to conserve, but there's a whole swimming pool on Esplanade Avenue.
Yeah, understood.
I just want to comment on that. That's me.
Please, sir.
We ask the public, please, for your own safety, do not move barricades and boards out of the way. It irked me just a little bit because NOLA.com picked it up as a pothole.
So where we are going forward is
How will this long-term solution ultimately be developed? I mean, will there be, various studies? How does this look like, and how would something like that, are you all making sure through the process? So I can
Yes,
better understand.
of course, the first, what you said, studies. I know everyone doesn't like to have to do studies, but for something like this, it would be a detailed study at a parish level, sewage and water utility level, and a regional level. Then based upon that study, then you would determine the path forward. But again, the first action would be a study.
And it will incorporate more than just saltwater, because this is the issue of the day.
Sure.
But that water quality master plan, that'll be a specific topic within that document.
Right, and you already have the money for that to do that
We do.
study, right,
We do.
right,
So
I
that-
remember that.
Good
Yep.
news. The timing is good there.
It was like $200 and something thousand for that study, right?
Yes.
Yeah, got it, okay, thank you.
Thanks. I got a series of follow-ups, but I'll start with, I think it might be worth explaining to the public, not just the difference versus the West Bank and East Bank pipeline, but also the mechanism in which they're transmitting water. And by that, I mean, Jefferson Parish has gone with the lay flat pipe solution.
Mhm.
And early on, my communications with Mr. Corbin as well as with Colin, that was never really a viable option for New World, especially the public understand is when you see Jefferson Parish laying out those flat pipes, and that's that immediate, like the West Bank, you're talking about 15 to 20 million gallons per day. On East Bank of New Orleans, you're talking 150 million.
That's correct.
And that's just not just the amount of water, it's the pressure of the water going through. So when you see Jefferson doing the work, their solution is a quicker solution. Because I mean, could you explain the difference between laying that flat pipe versus the larger pipe solution that we would have to use?
Yeah, so we looked at a number of different options, and the first option we looked at was a 60-inch plastic pipe that would convey enough water for both Jefferson and Orleans. But the challenge is there's only 2 plants in the North American continent that make pipe that big. We just couldn't even get enough of that pipe. So at that point, it was decided Jefferson could use the lay flat pipe, but for us, you hit the nail on the head. It would take 15 plus individual conduits. And not just the conduits, you've got to have pumps on each of those pipes as well. So it's a large number of pumps and pipes. There just isn't enough geographic space there at the toe of the levee, as well as that amount of pipe. I mean, it's hundreds of miles of that lay flat pipe that you would need. So a single 48-inch conduit really is the best option for us from an engineering perspective.
And one, I would like to chime in also, what we've, since working with our partners with the Corps, especially very tight restrictions that we had to deal with the Corps relative to the Mississippi River levee stability. And especially when it comes to the factors of safety of the Mississippi River. And what we've gone through with our plan as well as Jefferson Parish relative to the East Bank is that there are restrictive guidelines we have to follow from the Corps relative to the amount of weight you can put on certain sections of the Mississippi River levee, based on safeties, and we have that information. So again, that's also one of the factors on our end, why we went with the single pipe instead of the multiple pipes. And the booster pump stations really exerted quite a bit of weight and stress on the levee, and we really have to take that into account because the levee really is the crown jewel that we make sure there's no negative impacts on the levee system itself.
Well, and obviously I would add that in the short term, that 60-inch pipe solution was not viable, but as we're looking at regional in play in the future going forward.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Next follow-up, really to Councilman Druso's comments. We've known this was going to be a problem for a while as we saw the river level drop and as the federal government and the Corps and our trading partners continue to dredge the river lower, because obviously as we continue to dredge the river lower and it'll create an environment in which salt water could move forward. I guess my concern is, and this is really probably a core question, but I'll pose it to you anyway. In 1988, when you had the last saltwater intrusion, according to the Corps' own documentation on their website, it was determined then to have the sills, these preventive sills, be reconstructed and maintained on a 5.5 year basis. Since 1988, it's been more of an 11-year kind of, we're going to revisit the sill. And I've reached out to our congressional partners. They've said, well, it's a funding issue. And for me, I guess my frustration being in government, and I'm sure your frustration in your role, is that I am very tired of hearing about how funding is not available when the horrific thing happens versus sounding the alarm at the first 5 year increment where they couldn't do the sill rehabilitation. So have there been any communications with the Corps that they intend to go back to that 5.5 year or sooner sill remediation or sill maintenance versus 11 year? Because as everyone set up here, it's more than likely we're going to see the reality is the climate has changed. We're seeing more expansive and long-term droughts. This is going to be a recurring issue. Does the Corps have a plan on how they're going to address sills to deal with the recurring issue?
Yeah, I would say yes, for further detail, consult the Corps. They can give you the information, but I can say, this happened last year. So, 2022. And again, the Corps trigger is the flow coming down the river relative to that saltwater intrusion. And they have mechanisms in place on, at what that time frame should be to build that sill. Again, the 1988, very good report, 1988 as well as 1994. But the Corps has mechanisms in place relative to when a sill is constructed. The location of the sill is pretty much from 1988. It's the same place where it is right now. And the amount of flow it would take to erode the sill. So again, the sill from last year in 2022, it lasted to January. Once the Florida River gets up to right around 400,000 CFS, it pretty much erodes and washes the entire sill away, and that's how it's designed.
Okay, and I guess a follow-up question, generally speaking about the river itself, many of us are familiar with the Colorado River crisis, as far as how the river has been depleted over time through agricultural, industrial use, to the point where over decades, there's been a negotiation to address river usage. I say that with the Mississippi because it's not just an issue of a drought affecting the water levels. There is tremendous agricultural and industrial use off of the Mississippi River. And I bring this up because I met with a tourism leader who said, well, listen, I think the solution is we have to get everyone north of New Orleans to stop using the river to increase the flow. And to be honest, you're talking about pure math. If you got everyone who is using the river for industrial and agricultural use to either turn off their spigot or turn it halfway, it would increase the amount of water to address the flow issues going down. The reality is that has never happened, and there's never been a conversation a la Colorado to say, well, if we're looking at the impacts for everyone downriver, why aren't we having a larger national conversation? Because the river has had these historic drops more often than not. It's an ongoing issue. Are y'all aware of any regional, state, or multi-state conversations about how we're going to collectively use the entire river going forward?
We've had some discussions about that, and some of those questions are asked because some folks brought up, well, municipalities, what if every municipality upstream used water conservation measures? And the challenging part about that is, you know, what you're using then goes into wastewater and then it comes back in the river. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The discussion about agriculture is an interesting one, but it's bigger. It's bigger than that because there is so much water flowing through the river. Our daily supply flows by our intakes every 1.5 seconds, right? Even now at our low river flow levels. So that specific discussion, I'm not sure that it has taken place at a multi-state level, but we have had some local discussions with the Corps about that. And as far as shutting agriculture down, probably wouldn't be palatable. I mean, we had the discussion here about the answer. You could just build a sill all the way across the river.
Right.
But it would shut down commerce to the entire interior of the
And
United States.
that was a conversation some folk had with me very early. And I said, that's not really viable because the river as a navigable body helps feed and clothe and provide resources the entire length of the United States.
That's correct.
It's an ongoing challenge because obviously, even when you look at general conservation principles, like for example, all the various basins and dredging projects we have that are offshoots of the river, those also impact the amount of flow that comes through the traditional waterway. It's just, there seems to be an inability for us as a nation to have conversations about how we can have holistic solutions that we all have to address some level of collective pain in order to make everything more powerful. But I bring up the Colorado River because all the arguments you've made are the same ones that were made with Colorado, as in, well, if I use less water for my agricultural products, well, then that affects how much I can pull each year, which was the weird Colorado compact, which is a whole separate, could be a whole separate meeting, but there has to be a dialogue because the reality is, as we have increased droughts upriver, as we have non-adjustment in usage throughout the river, and people continue to use it in their traditional ways, all those things, including when we divert water to the Atchafalaya Basin or diversion projects, those all affect flow. We have to have a real holistic conversation on how we address all these different areas when the Corps' modeling shows, well, wait a second, we're about to have an issue. What can we do preventively using all the states that line the river to say, what can we all do if we see the salt wedge coming? How can we make minor adjustments throughout that entire area to potentially lessen the impact? Because the solution right now is, well, we'll put a pipe up to Kenner, a 60-inch pipe to Kenner, and you acknowledge as well as all of us that that's Kenner today. What happens if the flow gets so low that the Kenner help isn't enough? Well, then we have to move the pipe further upriver. And you basically have a moving target that puts us, even with a permanent solution, it's a permanent temporary solution because the flow of the river and where we can find water to combat that salt wedge, it's a moving target. It could go, at some point, we could have a pipe fast to go through St. Charles Parish. The pipe could go above St. Charles Parish and go all the way close to Baton Rouge at some point. That might be a reality we have to address and face. But if we can have, I mean, obviously, I'm in a lot of land thinking that we are able at this point to have a national dialogue about anything because Congress can't do Congress. But unless we have a larger national holistic solution, in addition to what we can do locally, we're going to have to go beg Congress every couple of years to move our pipe. So that's all I have. Councilman Thomas, follow up.
No, that's an interesting conversation about the Corps and the Colorado River. But I think you, Mrs. Spooner, you tried to allude. One of the differences, the Colorado River, I mean, it's dammed in about 15 locations, and because of their inability to access fresh water, like our region, and the natural topography is dammed so that you can have water performing, which is a little different from our tributary system, gives us more access to fresh water than that particular region. So in some ways, I think you have to take a look at it from a national perspective. But the other point that I think Councilmember you raised has to do with the Corps. And I wrote down a comment when the Corps was mentioned because we all hear the comment par for the course. Well, this is an example of par for the Corps, especially when you look at requests for funding versus funding. Now, we don't want to get into it. Our Corps partners have been really good with this issue, but the history of it is because it's not a new issue, because it's an issue at some point, our national government, whether it's national security, whether it's strategic oil reserves, whether it's this 35-state tributary system, whether it's access to what we found during COVID and inflation and all those other impacts that the river has post-Katrina. When will the Corps make the kind of investment, right? We all remember Professor Ivan and the Hurricane Pam slosh model, where Mary Landrieu asked for almost $1 billion so that we could be protected from a category 4 or 5 system. And the Corps said, I know what you say you need. I know what the experts say you need, but take 300. The 300, Councilmember Jeruso, was $600 million short of the $1 billion they asked for, and wasn't enough to protect us from a hurricane that each actually scaled down to some say what might have been a 2.5 or a 3. So that's the ultimate question. At what point does the Corps make an investment about this strategic positioning in our nation? And at what level will they invest to protect us, not just from storm to storm, but from rainfall to rainfall? So that's interesting stuff, man.
The board is clear, so we have no further questions for y'all. Thank y'all for being here today. We appreciate the ongoing communication. Grace, we appreciate all the outreach you've been doing with Anna as well, to the public on the issue. So, thank you for being here today. With that, I will move to adjourn, seconded by Councilman Deruso. Any objections? Hearing none, we are adjourned.